Sure, Tov, everyone. Welcome to video number 14 in our WhatsApp group. The descendants of the Apter Rebbe said that telling this story to others, not just reading it or hearing it, but telling it to others, is a wonderful segula for single Jews to find their destined soulmates. So listen carefully. And I adapted this story from a book called Good Vach, and I call it The Different Identities of Hershel. Rabbi Hershel, who lived in the town of Ribichev, was a very pure, innocent soul. He spent all day learning Torah and praying, and as a result, of course, he didn't have many possessions to worry about. In fact, he had hardly anything at all. And it didn't seem to bother him that he had a daughter who was now of marriageable age, and it was important to find her a shidduch, but he had no resources whatever to provide a dowry for her, which in those days, in the late 1700s, made it almost impossible to find a good match. When people would ask him, "What about your daughter? You have to find her a shidduch." He said, "Don't worry, God in heaven will provide. He always takes care of us." And he just went back to his books. So at a certain point, his friends and admirers decided to take the matter into their own hands, and they sat together and discussed for several times to come up with a good plan, and finally they came up with something. And they decided that they would take him to the next fair in Leipzig, the famous fairs in Leipzig, that there would be many very wealthy merchants, and surely among them someone would have a son that would want to get involved in a shidduch with Hershel, with Rabbi Hershel, especially since they decided what they would do is they bought him a set of fancy, wealthy clothes that wealthy people wear, and when they got to Leipzig, they spread the word that the rabbi and gavir and wealthy person, Rabbi Hershel, the rich man from Ribichev, is here looking for a shidduch for his daughter. So people some of the people with eligible sons were quite enticed. He's a rabbi, he's wealthy, what could be better than that? And a match was discussed with several different people, and finally a match was made between Rabbi Hershel, and Mr. Zelig. That wasn't his name, but that's what we're calling him, Mr. Zelig. When Mr. Zelig said to Hershel, and will you support the couple according to your means? And Rabbi Hershel said, of course, although he had a very different idea of according to your means meant than the generous amounts that Mr. Zelig had in mind. When they came back to Ribichev, so he, of course, immediately told his wife all about finding a chassan for their daughter. He was quite happy about it. But his wife realized there had to be more going on than this. She said, "Wait a second. They think you're so wealthy, but how are we going to be able to send presents for the chatan, for our daughter's fiance, and how are we going to be able to cover the expenses of a wedding, and with what are we going to help them to get started in life?" He said, "Look, God Almighty found us a chassan, He'll find us a way to send presents also." So weeks went by, months went by, and no presents arrived at the Zelig household. And he and Mr. Zelig and his wife started getting a little nervous about it. So they decided to write a letter to their machutanim to the family of the Kala. But they realized they didn't know his address, exactly the address of Rabbi Hershel. So they addressed a letter to Hershel HaGavir B'Ribichev. They figured Ribichev's not that big. The postman will know who's the rich Rabbi Hershel. So the letter got to the post office in Ribichev, and the postman only knew one wealthy Hershel in town. And so he went to his home, and this Hershel was indeed quite wealthy. but unfortunately he never had any children. And when he opened his letter talking about a shidduch with his daughter and where's the presents for the chatan, he got very upset. He thought somebody's playing a very unpleasant joke on him, a prank, and he just tore up the letter, threw it in the garbage, and forgot about it. So Mr. Zelig and wife did not receive any answer to their letter, and they wrote another letter. Didn't receive an answer to that one, and they wrote a third letter, and they didn't receive an answer. By now, several months had gone by, and they were quite concerned. So Mr. Zelig realized that they would have to, the only possible way to work this out was he and his wife would have to travel to Rebbe and confront Rabbi Hershel about this lack of decorum, this violating the customs and not sending presents to the chassan. They would have to deal with him face to face. So they came to Rebbe and they asked directions. Where does the wealthy Rabbi Hershel live? Rabbi Hershel HaGavir. And so they were directed to the rich man's house, the one to whom their letters had been delivered. But as soon as they saw him, they realized this wasn't the father of the Kala, and they apologized to him. And he said, "Yeah, I received the letters, but I couldn't relate to it." So they left his house, and they didn't know exactly what they should do next. And then Mr. Zelig's wife remembered that she had a rabbinical ancestor, a very great Rav who was buried in the cemetery in Rebbe. So she said, "Let's go to the cemetery, and we'll daven by the grave of my holy ancestor for enlightenment, and I'm sure we'll be answered. We'll gain some clarity." So they went to the cemetery, and near the entrance to the cemetery was a man collecting money. He was soliciting for Haknosas Kala. And he saw these wealthy-looking people that he knew were from out of town, so he figured they would be good clients. So he went up to them, and said, this is an opportunity for a great mitzvah. The daughter of the daughter of a great rabbi here in town is getting married, and he doesn't have a cent to his name for the wedding and the expenses and the presents and setting up a house. So when they heard that, they started to get a little nervous. They looked at each other, and both of them said at the same time, "What's the name of this rabbi?" And the man told them, Rabbi Hershel. And they were very upset. They asked directions to how they could find his house, and off they went. That's the end of part 1. Please now directly continue in part 2.